Good morning. Here with Dr. Cheryl Carthouse. How many people right now are reaching burnout? I know with whatever we're doing right now, working, kids, no kids, not working, trying to stay functional and not give in to the tendencies and the stress that we might be experiencing can be really hard. And expect that we're all doing different things. We're all going to achieve different levels of burnout through all of this. Maybe now, maybe we have already, maybe we've gone through days where things just seem really hard. I think right now we're running on steam. There's a lot of decision fatigue that we've been experiencing. What does life look like, and trying to understand what that is? How long is it going to last? There's been a lot of different indications from different provinces here in Canada as to how long they think at least the economic aspect is going to be before things are opened up again. We're really trying to understand and have some sort of sense of control and coherence about what the future might be, whether that's financially, especially even in regards to our roles that they've been crossed over with so much that is going on now, working from home, maybe trying to be 100% full-time partner where we would have gotten that space before, and then also parenting if you have children, and trying to do all of this in a confined space, which we also haven't needed to do necessarily unless it's a choice to work from home already for you. And just understanding how this is all changing and how it might still actually even change, and how we're going to adjust when things do start to maybe open up a little bit more. But again, this is all going to be new. To reiterate, this is our mission here for Mental Fortress Mondays, is to provide a space and understand the what, where, when, how, who, and why of how to build mental resilience. In this ongoing pandemic, we're all experiencing stress, and for many of us, it's in lots of different ways that we've never had to experience before, and in an extreme way with all these extreme changes. And we're trying to deal with all of these new, very, very new situations that we feel like we have no control over. Navigating these extreme changes, as well as any other stress we really encounter, be it today or in the future, it can be done in a healthy way where the outcomes actually can make us stronger instead of adding more stress. And mindfulness can actually bring this for us. I found a meditation practice of my own, and I originally started meditating and kind of was drawn to this work through mindfulness. And so it's my goal and my intention to share all the ins and outs about what I have learned, and to touch on, some of the research, some fabulous artistry skills, and some stories that we can then also engage in a short practice here. So today we're exploring the idea of when. When is it best to engage in a mindful or meditation practice? And understanding how we can go forward with that will also then be the next step. So just a short recap from last week. So here is a little mini version of the diagram that we did last week. We want to understand that this little surrounding here, pretend that this is us, this little stick figure, where this surrounding aspect here is our bodies. And our bodies act as a filter. It catches things from the external environment that might be coming in that we might feel as intrusive, as stress, as an attack, whether it be actually from a person or whether it be from other environmental stresses. They're going to be the environment coming in. And then it also acts as a filter to understand what our own responses are, that we can actually sense and feel these, gut-wrenching emotions that we might actually experience, then be able to then process them in a little bit of a different way because they're acknowledged, rather than having immediate reactive outbursts or something that's going to possibly influence the relationship or influence how we're going to interact with that situation, how we're going to be able to handle it, all of the additional stress that we might be experiencing. Understanding and practicing this filter, which is the body sensations, provides a little bit more coherence for our intentions and then behaviors. So we've established in some of that understanding that our body can act as a filter. And then how do we actually engage this, or what do we do with this if we know that it's a tool? Mindfulness actually can help teach us that. How many people have gotten to a point where they've suddenly realized, I am not good right now? maybe looking back on that, you recognized, okay, yeah, there could have been some warning signs, but maybe not. Maybe it also just feels like all of a sudden you have this huge burden on you and you're feeling really overwhelmed. You're feeling like things are piled up, or you just freeze and totally disengaged because it's so overwhelming. One of the most clear ways that this comes out is in our relationships. Feeling annoyed at someone or having someone come in and ask just that one additional thing and you snap at them. It's through relationships that we really understand even what our limits are and if we're being reached. Maybe we're irritated and we have some of these outbursts. I definitely had one of these moments the other day. I was talking to someone, they were about 3 sentences in, and I immediately was annoyed. Now, they didn't say anything that was particularly triggering. There was no, negative intention or anything that should have been, someone was looking in from the outside that should have been triggering. And yet my back was up immediately and I could feel all these sensations in my body. My stomach was a little bit maybe a knot, so I'm trying to describe that a little bit better. And like in my core, I just felt like it was hot. There was sort of a tingling sensation. My throat was getting hot. My throat was getting warm. I'm just going to stop right there in the story. And at this point in the scenario, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. And I don't want to be talking to this person anymore. I'm sure we've all been there with that, whatever that situation is that you just don't want to be there. I felt suffocated. I wanted to get out. I didn't really want to be engaging with them anymore, but it was something that I felt like I needed to just get done. And just that feeling of wanting to get out. I'm not sure where we're going to go these days, but that feeling of I didn't want to be in this scenario anymore. And feeling like this, it's an easy time then to snap at people or to have a reaction that isn't necessarily filtered through a positive intention or the type, I guess demonstrating even the type of person that I want to be, that it's very easy then to snap. Maybe again, it's, an extra, your kid coming on or coming over to ask you something while you're in the middle of a whole bunch of other things, or it's a coworker or a spouse or someone's calling you, whatever it is, just that extra thing added to you when you're already feeling really dysregulated is just that extra straw in the camel's back that is just done. You're just done. The interesting aspect of all of this and where we can intervene is that our bodies are acting as this gauge for us. It's acting as a gauge to recognize when we need something. And if we can catch it a little bit earlier before we get to this limit of I can't do this anymore, then we can actually take some action while we still have a little bit of that energy. And the mindfulness actions or activities that we're going to do and that I've been talking about and that I will continue to talk about in this series are what actually can provide this learning for us. It's always something that we want to do in kind of more of a safe space first, and then practicing that activity so that when we really need to use it in a stressful situation, we can do that. Kind of like we don't want to jump into a burning building in order to learn how to fight a fire. We're going to do all of that rehearsal beforehand, and then when we really need it, when that building's on fire, we'll then be able to actually jump in a more effective way. So mindfulness gives us the tools to first practice our gauges and understand how our body is telling us that we're at this limit or where we are in understanding our limits. And then 2, to recognize what that gauge is signaling us. So do we then go forward? Is there a little bit still a capacity to do something with that? Or do we want to engage in a different activity that's going to help to ground us a little bit better too? So mindfulness can help us to first notice the signs of these feelings, and it really can actually help us to stop us in our tracks and recognize and understand where we're at mentally, and then again to determine what we need to then feel whole and grounded and peaceful, less agitated, irritated, or disengaged. So let's talk about the steps here first, and we'll get right into our model for today. So the steps are going to be to gauge, and that's going to be understanding what our body is doing, understanding how we can use our bodies as a gauge, to gather info, and then we split off into 2 possible next step outcomes is to either go and push forward a little bit more or to ground. So let's talk about some of these aspects. First, to gauge. Now, this is going to understand our own personal gauges. It's the thing that provides that, like, oh, okay, yeah, like this is actually a good thing, or that I just don't feel right about that. I don't want to go there. Even at a very, very subtle way, or in a very, very subtle way, this can actually provide that information for us, and we can get more and more attuned to that, to acknowledge when it is leading us in which direction. We can use the gauge to understand if something's going to be helpful or not for us. And it's that how we're going to know. And to explore personal gauges, then we're going to do a little bit of that exercise later on, is to understand we want to practice in a very benign way, and then be able to use those understandings and the gauge when we come to a more stressful situation. The second part is going to be to gather info. So using the gauges, where are we assessing ourselves in understanding what our limits are and whether we're way above them or way below them. We actually have limits on two sides of this being okay window, which is called the window of tolerance. I'm going to describe the window of tolerance in just a few minutes. It was a theory or a model described by the National Institute of the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine, and can be really helpful in understanding when to use mindfulness, in particular with trauma, and understanding when we're going to be, again, inside this I'm still okay zone, or whether we're above or below our limits. And then those next steps are going to be to either go where we can actually engage and still push a little bit more, or it might be to ground. And those are going to be to engage in activities that bring you back to a place where we can, again, be in this proper tolerance window. Some of those activities can be super simple, like just a shift in movement, a getting up or opening your eyes if it is during an episode of mindfulness that you're doing. And then some of them can be a little bit more in depth, where we can actually create our own grounding anchors that can help to bring us back to this space. And that's going to be something that we explore next week at 9 o'clock on Mindfulness Mondays. So let's understand a little bit more about this model. So as we're stressed, we are then going to assess our body and understand what is telling us where we are at. And when we do the activity later, you'll get a better sense of that. When we use our body as a gauge, it's going to give us a couple of pieces of information. One, are we within this window of tolerance? This space where we can still function, we can think straight and clearly, we can take action that's appropriate. Our gauges are going to help us to understand more so likely when we hit our limits or outside of it. Often within this window, we're not feeling anything in particular. We might be feeling good, but we're not feeling anything particularly stressful. Typically not in our body. When we reach this upper limit, this is going to be hyperarousal. This is when we're feeling really anxious, we're angry, out of control, overwhelmed. Your body gets into this fight or flight, runaway kind of mode. This isn't something that we choose. It's a reaction that takes over our body. So once we're in this hyper state of arousal, like a volcano, just wanting to explode and having all of this overwhelmed feeling, then we know that we're outside our limit. And we want to be able to then, as a next step, do something that grounds us to pull us back into our window of tolerance. Now, if we hit this lower limit, and again, our gauges can help to understand when we're getting here or when we are either approaching the limit, often we just notice when we're done. This hypoarousal is kind of more of a state of spacey, zoned out, maybe numb or frozen. Your body just wants to shut down, and so we have our little sleeping guy here. Sometimes people actually just get quite tired and they want to sleep. And again, this isn't something that we choose. It's a reaction that just takes over. So gathering the info, understanding where we're at, and then being able to practice our gauges so that when we're approaching things like this and different feelings like this, we can understand if we're approaching the limit or if we're already out of it. When we have no sense of our gauges, we immediately end up realizing when we're already out of it, or maybe somebody else realizes for us and they're like, well, you're not doing too great today, why don't you go for a walk? And then we sort of realize, like, oh, am I being really snippy, or am I being really irritated and interacting with people in a different way? The